So welcome to the Demography Today lecture series, sponsored by the BBVA Foundation and in coordination with the European Horizon 2020 Long-Pop project. We are very lucky today to have Michel Oris here, Vice Rector of the University of Genève, full professor at the School of Social Science at the University of Genève as well, and he has been previously director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Gerontology and Vulnerability Studies and co-director of the Swiss National Center of Competency in Research Life Center, Overcoming Vulnerabilities, Life Course Perspectives. He also founded the program on socioeconomics and demography at the University of Geneva. He is president of IDELF, the association of International Association of Demographers on the French language, and of the Société de Démographie Historique, and as well co-founder of the European Society of Historical Demography, with other ones. His research focused on inequalities with an emphasis on the living and health condition of the elderly, injustice regarding death, interaction between individual trajectories and the dynamics of social structure, between vulnerabilities and life courses. So, Michel, thank you very much for coming. It's always a pleasure to have a friend around, and welcome to our lecture series. As usual, we have around 1 hour and 1 hour something for your lecture, and then we will open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you to the foundation. I tried to study the full name of the bank, but there is one name that in Spanish is impossible to pronounce for my truth, so I will avoid and stay with a general expression of my gratitude. The topic today is a little bit strange because it's being poor in an extremely wealthy country. Spontaneously, you do not imagine to see a lot of poverty in a country like Switzerland, which is one of the most wealthy in the world, but it's one elderly about 5 that is concerned by that kind of situation. And you can even less have that kind of idea in mind that there is a strong debate that has been relayed by the media in Switzerland about the number of millionaires among the elderly, more significantly the idea that the level of income of the retired is above the level of the average income of the young adults. To tell it differently, that the elderly are a privileged population. In contrast, you have those poor people helped among others by an NGO, Prosenectute, which was founded 1 century ago to help the old people in need, and which is still very active. They published 10 years ago this book from the testimonies of the social assistant living with few means, who poor old people are able to live and in a rich country where the cost of living is extremely high, as everybody who visited Switzerland knows. I will make you a presentation in 5 sections. One is an history of science and social realities in the same time, through gerontology evolved across the time and how the social situation of the elderly changed during the last, let's say, 30 years or 3 decades. Then I will have a few words about the LIFES project and the study of poverty as a vulnerability. Then I will present our approach, because I forget to say, and I feel ashamed that this is, as always, a collective effort with many colleagues and friends. We will present our approach of long lives and old age poverty. Move to an historical approach in the 4th section, and finally, in the longer one and the last one, analyze the life course construction of poverty in old age in Switzerland. So, as you can see here, we have a start in 1979 with a survey on the health and living condition of the elderly, which was done in 2 Swiss cantons. Swiss is extremely complicated. I mean, when you do not understand something, it's at the cantonal level. And those 2 cantons were Valais, which is a mountain area, Catholic, and Genève, a very urban place from Protestant tradition. And at the time, it was really something new. We have before some governmental report on the situation of the elderly, but they asked to medical doctors, to architects, to sociologists, to university professors, what can you tell us about the situation of the old people? As strange as it could seem, in 1979 it was the first time that they asked to the old people themselves to explain their own situation through a survey which was typically named Exclusion and Dependency Among Aged Individuals. It reflects a very dark vision of the situation of the old people in Switzerland at that time at the university level. For the people working at the university, they expected to find really bad things. Then in 1994, it became neutral like Switzerland, autonomy and sociocultural environment of aging individuals. Okay, if you can explain me what it means, do it, because I don't understand. Something completely okay. Yeah? And finally, my team did in 2011-2012 a third wave, a project named Old Age Democratization, but with a point of interrogation, and a subtitle that I will explain later, Progress and Inequalities in Switzerland. So you see an evolution in the concerns of the scientists, but it remains that for 2 cantons, we are one of the very rare places in the world where we have comparable data collected along 3 waves during the last 3 decades. It's extremely rare. I was a little bit surprised about that. Okay, 3 waves. For the demographers, you know what it means. It's cross-sectional data with advantages and limitations. And so my colleagues from the preceding surveys, Christian Larive d'Épinay and his team, stay with me, please. They decided to move to a longitudinal perspective. And they took in the 1994 sample the people aged 80 and more, and they followed all of them each year during 10 years, a prospective panel. It was under the influence of the life course lifespan approach, which represented a real renewal and a real progress in the studies of the old people, because when you have a life course perspective, you don't really mind about the border. Are you old at 60, 65, 70, 80? Well, it depends of you. There are huge inter-individual variation that you can take into account with individual longitudinal approach. I show you here Glenn Elder and his book Children of the Great Depression, and Paul Baltes, a German psychologist who was one of the founders of the lifespan psychology and also the principal investigator of the Berlin aging study, which remain really a terrific studies about the elderly. But I will not develop that here because I will have the chance to do that later during the talk. It's just to emphasize that the life course perspective is multidisciplinary. It's not only social science, it's also psychological science, and there is a track of research in life course epidemiology also. Here you have a book that was published in English. I chose the English publication for you on Swiss this prospective panel where they followed the oldest old as much as they could. It was a great research, but with several limitations. First, you have attrition, and a lot of attrition is attributed to death. I mean, you are working on people aged 80s or 90s and more, so it's just normal. And they have been obliged to renew the sample in the middle of the research project. Moreover, it's extremely expensive to look at the people each year. It was also extremely difficult in the Swiss research system because nobody is ready to give you a grant of 10 years. They had to apply each 3 years, crying, please, please, I need the grant to continue, and so on. It was really a difficult adventure. And finally, the result of those limitations is that the sample is little. It's 300 people. 400 in the best case. So, but they discovered and they emphasized a lot that at the end, only 45% of the oldest old are ending their life in dependency. Even me, I talk, okay, 80s, 90s, 80% of the people are finishing in a house for old people or in hospitals. No, 45%. 55% are avoiding that. They stay fit until the very end, but it's a little minority. And a larger group are people who are becoming frail. In fact, almost 80% of the people are becoming frail at some moment. And some of them are becoming dependent, but not the majority. And frailty is very close from vulnerability as a concept, and I will come back on that later. So in the third wave, VLV, it means vivre, leben, vivere. They needed a Belgian like me to find a politically correct name for Switzerland with the 3 main languages of the country. And we made again Geneva and Valais, just to be able to compare with the previous waves. But we added also the French-speaking part of the canton of Bern, to 2 Basel. Yes, it's half canton. Everything is complicated in Switzerland. Basel city and Basel landscape, land in German. And we included also the Italian-speaking canton Ticino. To more or less capture the Swiss diversity. As you can see, with a cross-sectional approach, anyway, collecting money from 3 different grants, pushing the local government to help them, and so on and so on, we arrived to collect data on 3,600 people with a sample stratified by age groups and by sex. It includes 500 people with cognitive impairment, and we used a proxy procedure to ask to a kin or a caregiver to answer a short questionnaire. And we implemented a life calendar. So not a prospective panel, but asking to the people, tell us about your past life. But I can forget that, no problem. So here you have one of these life calendar that was written by someone with terrific, I mean, it's extremely clear. So she's a woman born in 1925 in Evolène, which is a very little mountain village in Valais. And she indicates the birth of a sister when she was 2, then of a brother when she was 5, and another sister when she was 7, Catholic Valais, a lot of children during this period. And she started the primary school at 7, and then the housewife school at 12, it was typically Swiss. It was not the same for boys, and it was only for girls, but to become a perfect housewife after your marriage. And indeed, she became a housewife at 16 in Zermatt. And Zermatt is a very touristic place, so probably she worked in a hotel for very wealthy people. And at 18, she met Henri. No? And obviously, they married 2-3 years later and established a household in Nanda, which is another village in the Valais Mountains. And she was housewife, and then arrived the children, Paul, Anne, Gabriel, Emile, Yvonne. And at 40, when the younger was old enough to go alone to school, she took an appointment at 50% as a secretary. And now I will continue because it's marvelous. Her parents died, she became grandmother, she retired at 62. By the way, at 47, she got a breast cancer, but she survived. She retired at 62, she had a car accident at 65, and so on. Heart operation at 74. And at that time, her husband died at 74, and she decided to go back from the mountain to the plain in the main city. I think you see typical pattern that are often studied, but here you see it for a real person. And at 80, she met Stefano. Yeah, you still have hope in your life. And at 4 years later, she entered in a house for old people, a medical house, after she broke a leg. And she was obliged at that moment to leave an independent house. So you see that those life calendars are terrific tool for data collection. And also, they are terrific because you have cross-memory process. You always remember your job when you married, that kind of things. You have the date, the years, and your age on each side of the table. And we push it, the things very far. Each person received a life calendar with his or her year of birth. It was personalized because we had the information in the sample data. So, yeah, and we made several tests, by the way, because we have the level of education in the cross-sectional, in the survey, and we checked it with the life calendar if it was consistent. We also asked somewhere the number of children, and we checked it if in the life calendars it was coherent. And we found some discrepancies in case of adoption, in case of children dying young, but nothing, but just normal, I mean. The reality is that a huge majority of the people loved to fill this calendar. It was a way for them to tell to themselves the story of my life. They enjoyed to do that. But we had also very bad experience with another sample of people from ex-Yugoslavia aging in Switzerland, and one of them started to cry, remembering people killed in front of a farm, and we interrupted the interview and so on. So but globally, it was well done because the people enjoyed to do it. And there are some psychological work explaining that process, by the way. Here, it's not a life calendar, and the red point is that this guy met Danielle. It means that Danielle, the red point, was the love of her life. Finally, I did something really romantic in my life. I asked to 3,000 people who has been the love of your life. And we have the answer here. You see that 49 and 50, 1949, 1950, you have a yellow. It's highlighted in yellow. It means that it was the most happy years of his life. And here, on the other side, it was difficult, the most difficult or the most vulnerable phase of his life. It's one of my PhD students, Julia Henke, who had this idea, 30 seconds, 2 pencils, you have a terrific qualitative perspective on a quantitative tool. Okay, so we replaced the very expensive prospective panel by this retrospective approach, the retrospective life calendar. Okay, now I switched to a second section. Originally, well, it's a strange story, by the way, but I do it rapidly. I became the head of the Center for Interdisciplinary Study of Gerontology because we had a crisis at the university, a huge crisis. The rectorate has to stay out. One of my friends, who was the head, went to the rectorate, and she told me, it's your duty to go. Okay, Annick, I will do that, but I was not a specialist of elderly and of aging issues. And we ended the preceding project, Swilsort, the 1994 web, and so on. We almost closed the center, and I tried to apply to have money, and we obtained money to do 3 cantons. And then we obtained the grant, and then we also obtained the best grant you can have in Switzerland, a national center of competencies in research, call it a pole of excellence. We never imagined to have both, but it was lives, overcoming vulnerability, life cost perspective. You have money for 4 years, and you can be renewed 2 times. So it changed your life as a researcher, for sure. Well, then we have panel of international experts putting a lot of pressure on us, as you can imagine. So I escaped the rectorate. But no, I'm serious. Of course, old age poverty can be seen as a vulnerability inscribed into life course. But instead of considering life with the classical tripartition, young, adult, old, once again, you arrive to the conclusion that those borders have no real meaning, and you look at the whole life course of the people as a continuity with accumulation process, leading to a situation in old age. Old age, to some extent, is really the conclusion of old social, economic, family life, and so on and so on. Vulnerability, instead of precariousness, of frailty, a concept that we were used to work with in gerontology, instead of poverty. Why? Because you have a terrific social demand. In fact, vulnerability was studied originally by people working on natural, who is it in English, catastrophe? Oh, okay, and they wanted to explain that it was not natural at all. In fact, with the same intensity for outbreak, you have thousands of deaths in a poor country and some dozen in a wealthy country, depending on your capacity to deal with the disaster. And here it was extended to the individuals. An individual is more or less vulnerable. And it as you see, this concept gained into 2000, into late 90s, but especially into 2000, so very recently, a terrific success in the scientific communities. Everybody is working, is speaking about vulnerability. When we apply it to have the pole of excellence on vulnerability, we talk to be original, and in fact, we are not original at all, as you can see. But in the same time, when the last decision was taken at the political level, they found attractive a social science project on vulnerability, and we can understand why. Here, it's an analysis that has been done by Oris. She analyzed some 10,000 abstracts of publication where the word vulnerability was part of. And you can see that you have here a divide between sociology, demography on this side, and psychology on the other side. And you have another divide from, let's say, gerontology, interest for elderly, frailty, and so on, to childhood, the ages of life, to tell it simply. And vulnerability is not exactly in the middle, but almost. So this concept has been adopted by a lot of people working on divorce, on stress disorder, on depressive symptoms, on adolescent health, on a quantity of different topics that reflect the success. But to some extent, it's a problem, because what is vulnerability? All and nothing, everything. What can you do with this concept? First, it's important to take into account the cradle, what I call it the cradle effect. To some extent, we are supposed to be postmodern societies with more turbulent life course, flexibility on the labor market. We now explain in the secondary school to the adolescent, but you will not have a job, the same job all along your life. You will be obliged to change. You know? It's maybe not true, by the way, but it's thing that we believe and that we teach. Family dynamics, the growth of divorce, family recomposition, multiple household form, living arrangements, and so on, the destandardization of life course, and so on. And for sure, that idea that we are becoming a society of individuals, what is completely paradoxical, by the way. But a society where the emphasis is on the personal self-realization. You must have objectives, you must reach them, you are responsible of your life, actor of your life. A similar concept with the same success is agency. Nobody is able to define what is agency, by the way, as far as I know. But anyway, it is also a terrific success. And it's, to some extent, it's the opposite of vulnerability. So you see that I'm quite critical. But in the same time, we cannot be arrogant scientists and tell to the citizen, to the political people, you are concerned with vulnerability in the society, but it's a vague concept we are not interested in. We have to answer to the social demand. That's probably clearly your duty. And moreover, frailty belongs to gerontology, precariousness belongs to economy and sociology, and so on and so on. Vulnerability belongs to nobody. It's not bad to start an interdisciplinary journey. Also, we need a more holistic perspective, because we know that if you are vulnerable, if your professional life, it has spillover effect on your family life, and so on and so on. So just looking at one trajectory is not enough. We need to be more holistic. And now, we remain with the risk of instrumentalization. Some of my colleagues analyzed programs for young unemployed people in Switzerland. And those programs are named Semester of Motivation. You don't find a job. You are not motivated enough. The labor market has nothing to do with that. It's a question of personal motivation. In the societies of individuals, it's almost normal to come with that kind of deviation. And so some colleagues, especially in France, they are used to debates, to political debates, they denounce violently the concept of vulnerability as a tool of the state to oppress the poor people. It depends on the use you do of the concept, of course, but there are risks of instrumentalization. And a weak theorization, I believe, it's obvious. So with all the people in lives, we try to work on a definition, and it's not completely a simple one. We have defined vulnerability as a weakening process and a lack of resource in one or more life domains that in specific context expose individuals or groups to negative consequences related to source of stress, an inability to cope effectively with stressors, and an inability to recover from stressor, or to take advantage of opportunities by a given deadline. In a few minutes, I will come back to poverty in old age, and I will try to illustrate the section that I read. There are other sections, but I haven't the data. It's probably relevant, but I haven't what would be needed to look at those aspects. And indeed, we are back to this project, the subtitle, Progress and Inequalities. It's a little bit strange, but in fact, for demographers, it's almost obvious. Each year, from the Second World War till now, we won 3 months of life expectancy. Switzerland has one of the highest life expectancy in the world, with Japan and a few other countries. And it means that today, the Italian immigrants who worked all his life in the construction sector, in the building sector, can also reach 65 or even 80. When the life expectancy increases, the selection is postponed. And so it means that when you have progress in life expectancy, you have a more heterogeneous elderly population that 3 or 4 decades before. And more heterogeneous, it means more unequal, concretely. Moreover, this evolution was rooted and embedded in other macro historical changes in Switzerland, but also in other Western countries at that time. In 1947, the population voted the first insurance for the old people. It was named AVS, Assurance Vieillesse Survivant. And at that time, in 1947, the life expectancy in Switzerland was 65, the age of retirement. So it is to say that it was to wait death, but in dignity instead of staying poor and miserable. And it's only in 1985 that was created, that was made compulsory, more exactly, the second pillar. We have, in fact, in Switzerland, a 3-pillar system. AVS 1947 is the first one, is survival. Then the second pillar, you accumulate cotization all along your professional life, and AVS and the second pillar, you are supposed to retire at 80% of your last income. And then you can take a third pillar to the bank. You just pay for it. It's your own business. And of course, many people could afford those cotization because it was the time of the 30 Glorious, and in Switzerland, don't be worried for the Swiss economy, but a few years. And finally, and it is also extremely important, it was at the period after the Second World War where the school system really expanded, especially the secondary level. So what we tried to do in the paper that I distributed, and if you did not receive it, just ask to Diego, that was published in Research in Human Development this year. It was following a suggestion of Dale Danafer and Jessica Kelly-Moore, crossing an historical, a generational, and a life course perspective. In between the historical change and the life course of the people, you have birth cohorts that we call generation also. By the way, there is a terrific domain in social science for people working on what they call the macro-micro linkage. It's very fashionable, but the late Tamara Arevan several decades ago spoke already about studying the synchronization between historical, family, and individual lives, but time. Anyway, that I had to show you, but it's not completely stupid, by the way. The life expectancy, it's fine. Here you have the generation we studied with 2-3 waves, 1886 until 1946. Those people went across, for some of them, 2 World War I, across all those historical changes, AVS and the second pillar. And each year I explain to 500 students that their mothers and grandmothers received the right to vote after the Thai or the Senegalese woman, only in 1971. Switzerland is a conservative country. Okay, now we are dependent, like everybody, of the preceding research. And if we look at poverty in old age, the founder is maybe this man, Rointree, who published in the late 1890s, early in 91, if I'm not wrong, a famous book about poverty among the old people. It was for him a consequence of the industrial society with old people breaking the body into coal mine, into factories, and so on, being old at 55, 57, and so on, with a lot of physical handicap and so on, and with the migration, staying alone without the children, living elsewhere, and so on. It has been very well studied in Germany, where Bismarck used that as a rationale to create one of the first welfare system, also to fight against the German Socialist Party, but it's another story. Anyway, so the industrial society was structurally creating massive poverty in old age. And indeed, all the historical studies are confirming this social reality. So after the Second World War, the establishment of the welfare state appeared as the paradise. Everything became new, changed, nobody had to die from hunger, in misery, and so on. But in fact, in the 70s, 80s, you have all a wave of research belonging to what has been called the political economy in gerontology, denouncing the persistent poverty of old people. A French sociologist, Serge Pogam, is famous to have worked on the new forms of poverty linked to the transition to adulthood, to precariousness, and so on. But in his first book, he said also, remember the old people. The old people are remaining in the majority very poor. It's the 30 glorious, we have the welfare state. What happened with you? You must be leftist, complaining, and so on. By the way, they were leftists, those people, indeed, both in the United States and in Europe. And Finally, you reach the paradise during the last 2-3 decades. Successful aging. Is it not wonderful? But Rowe and Kahn, they are very famous for this concept. In reality, it's extremely ambivalent or ambiguous because successful aging is that it implies that you take care of your health, you take care of yourself, so you take care of what you eat, of doing some physical activities and so on. You take care of yourself all along your life course. It's really a life course perspective. And so at the end, you are awarded with a successful aging. But I come back to my Italian immigrants who worked in the building sector all along his life. It will be more difficult for him than for a university professor. Successful aging has an implicit elitism, which is behind, quite obviously. Moreover, it's the time where not we, but where the gerontologists invented a new word, fourth age. Fourth age is the refuge of all UFers, who dark dreams of senility, decrease, and so on and so on. Of course, successful aging is only for the third age. And so we move from a tripartition of life to a life in fourth stage. By the way, try to find the definition of fourth age and the exact border between third and fourth age, you will not find. But you find that, by the way, in very scientific text. This is very coherent with the debate that emerged because, this tripartition, young, adult, old, and then oldest old, this is what in the 60s Matilda Riley called an age stratification. And for Riley, it was as important as the social stratification or the class structure, to speak in Marxist terms. And about class, you have a similar debate with Ulrich Beck, a famous author of Risk Society. Risk societies are societies of individuals. And he spoke about the end of classes and the erasure of social determinism. It's not because you are born in a blue-collar family or white-collar or middle-class family or so on that your life will be that or that. No, it's not the case anymore. Society that can no longer look in the mirror and see social class. All we have left are the individualized fragments. You. Indeed, it's related to a wave of research recently on what is called biographization. The idea that social stratification is replaced by biographization. You are the actor of your life, you are the responsible, you are in charge of your success but also of your failure, you accumulate your experience and so on. By the way, the people working on biographization believe also that no individual life course, it's not I divorce, I depress, I lost my job. No, it's not Russian mountains, it's Russian hills. You lost your job, yeah, flexible economy, okay, you find another job. You have more accidents, but they are less deep. They really developed this idea. I don't do very much in this paper because we are working on our generation, and biographization really is really applied to younger generation. But anyway, exactly in the same time, in the 1980s, early 90s, appeared the opposite theory. Within, to some extent, a new birth of the social stratification paradigm with fathers like Marx, Weber, and so on, but within the life course paradigm. In fact, you have Merton, American sociologist, who used something in the Bible, St. Matthew, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's the idea of accumulation of disadvantages or advantages. By the way, I show you very rapidly the cover of the book of Glenn Elder, The Children of the Great Depression, is to diet that you have children in a school in the Midwest. They are almost all the same social origin, but at the end of their life, they diverged. Because of few initial difference. And Merton originally, it's funny for us, he worked on the reputation of scientists. David, you have a high reputation, so your H index will increase tremendously. You are rich, so you will become richer. So if you like this kind of index, you can use this, you can go back to Merton. Danafer used it to study growing heterogeneity among the old population, exactly what I told some minutes ago. And they inspired Angelica Orand, an American researcher who developed the concept of life course capital, which was really the intersection between the welfare system, where you have to pay cotization during your working life, and at the end, because you accumulate this capital, you have a bed or a good pension, you are poor or you are wealthy in your old age. And we really use it a lot, Angelica Orand approach. So sometimes you have things line by line, but it's by chance. I'm a technological primitive. I don't know who it happened. Anyway, finally. Okay, now we move to empirical result. And by the way, I completely forget my pages, so I will definitely forget that one. So you see, first, Pogam and the guys in political economy of gerontology were true. Even in Switzerland in 79, I mean, not 45, 79, half of the people, of the old people were poor. And under the, in fact, we have in Switzerland, who is it? How can I translate that? It's the Swiss Federation of the Social Institution. And they fix the poverty threshold so that you could not migrate from a strict municipality to a generous municipality. But it's not done by the federal government, it's done by the Confederation of Social Institutions. And so it's the threshold in 79, okay, each time. It's the threshold of this year. What we see here is that indeed, AVS appeared in 1947, but people in 79, most of the oldest old, they didn't have the time to accumulate a life course capital, and they had a low pension and could not avoid poverty in old age. And then it decreased. In 94, in 2011, we arrived at 21%. And this is also a historical paradox, because in the 80s and 90s, the welfare state were attacked. It was the Reagan year, the Thatcher years. It was where several states cut it in the welfare budget. But it's the time where those welfare institutions were the most successful to decrease old age poverty, because the time to reach life course accumulation was reached by more and more generation, by more and more birth cohorts. And of course, Switzerland, second pillar, 1985, it's really late by European standards. But anyway, so okay. So you have a strong gender difference. We are in 1979. It's because in this generation, many women did not work. Or more exactly, they worked between the teenage age and the marriage, then became housewife, or they had interrupted incomplete career, so they accumulated really few. And it was quite impressive. I mean, more than 60 to more than 80 oldest old women were living below the poverty threshold. So it's really the normal fate, I mean. Or you die at young, or you ended your life in poverty still in 1979, not so far. Okay. And you see the progress. It has been whatever the age or the gender, impressive progress have been realized, decreasing economic poverty, but we remain with weaker but persisting gender difference. Still today, women are more often poor than males, but the gap is much less than 30 years ago. Those improvements were obviously realized thanks to the pension system, but fed in a period of economic growth. I mean, the rate of unemployment in Switzerland during this period is almost zero. It's almost nothing. Okay. And here, I'm sorry it's in French because I did not arrive to translate in time. I missed 10 minutes. But you have here the source of incomes for women and for men. And indeed, you see that the most important source of income are pension and also for women, but that's where the difference is probably the stronger. So it's really a question of access to the pension system that is making a strong difference. So it's a story of life course institutionalization. In life course research, you have the North American school and you have the German school, and the German school is really specialized in the idea that life course has been institutionalized by school. You have to be children all the time used to die, then you are an adult who are working, and then you have at 65 the pension. The institution are constructing your life course, but they are also protecting you. Old age poverty is a result of people life course in specific time and place. In fact, it's a concept that was developed by elder. What was really important for people is the age they had when the historical change happened. The people who were already in the 50s in 1985, when the second pillar was created, they could not accumulate enough cotization to have a good second pillar and stay out with 80% of the last salary. So it's really a macro-micro linkage, a linkage between historical change, life growth, through generation, through birth cohorts that has been important. And it explains why still today the oldest old are more often poor than the younger generation. Maybe it will change in 20 or 30 years, considering the trajectories of the young adults now, but at this stage, it's not the case. Now, we move to the last section, and my time is almost ended, so I will abuse of your time, if you don't mind, but I will try to, and I will do my best. So we have all a theoretical background, but I will especially speak about social stratification, accumulation of disadvantages, and institutionalization. It's more or less obvious from what I told you previously. It's also a way to introduce the data. So here we use it in 2011-2012 for the VLV survey. We used the data of the cross-sectional and of the life calendar. We have, of course, the age group, and you see that the oldest old, as I told you 2 minutes ago, are much more at risk of being poor in old age, from the people of 85, 89, and 90 and more. you see that women are also more at risk, and that's what we discussed in the preceding section. And then we add education. We have been stupid. I wanted to kill myself like a Japanese or something like, or someone like, because we didn't think to ask to the people the socioeconomic status of their parents. But we have education, which is a terrific proxy anyway, highly correlated in all the studies and so on, of at least early life condition. And it's quite terrible, by the way. Look, if you have a low education, it means no education or just compulsory to primary degree, you are 2 times more at risk, more than 2 times more at risk of being poor, that if you just made the middle education, apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is highly popular in German-speaking countries, and it's the case in Switzerland. It's more or less a secondary degree, but very professional. Manual, or to work in the shops and so on, or in the bank as clerk and so on. And if you compare to people with a higher education, they are half at risk of the people with a secondary degree. Concretely, between the people with low education and high education, you have a social gradient of 4. And it's quite terrible, I mean, as a social phenomenon. It's rare to have something so large, so deep. And it's not all. Look above. The oldest old and woman, it's not statistically significant anymore. So most of the gender discrimination is due to the fact that decades before, at the beginning of their life course, when they were young, women had a lower access to education than males. And the oldest all, it's because they reached the educational system before the democratization and the expansion of the secondary degree. It's once again a macro-micro interaction happening here. But then it was more difficult. We reconstructed the work trajectories, and we used the life calendars, where for each year of the working life we know if they worked or not and so on. We don't know exactly what they did, because in fact many people, they didn't write brickmaker, they wrote the name of the factories or the enterprise. And it's too complicated to find, of course. So we know that they were active, but not really more. And anyway, through a cluster analysis of longitudinal data, we identified 4 clusters with Traminer. The Long Pop PhD students have a wonderful workshop in September, and I can tell you that Traminer, it comes from the Gewürztraminer, because my friend Gilbert Richard loves very much this wine. But theoretically it's track mining, blah, blah, etc. But there is a story behind. Anyway, full employment, you are not surprised in Switzerland. Quasi-full employment, you start later and so on. Then you have start and stop and restart. You are not surprised. Woman, man. I think it's, in this generation it's quite obvious. So in fact we wanted to have a proxy of the number of years during people paid to accumulate the life cost capital and have a good pension. That was the idea behind. And is it here? Oh. No, come on. Ah, no, that. Sorry. And it was a terrific success, nothing works. Nothing is statistically significant. We did all that job for nothing. It does not work. It means that we have to understand why, because normally it's mechanical. You work, you pay, cotization. So something is wrong. We suspect. We also look at the life events. It's not really the biographization perspective applied to young people, but we know that we know in gerontology that people can fall down. The first time it's okay. The second time you remain with very few years of life expectancy. You can have problems with the dissolution of your relationship. You can become widows of widow or widower, and so on and so on. We look at family, bricks, at health problems, and so on. And as you can see, it does not work. But by the way, it means that the welfare system is good to help you when you have health problems. The Swiss system has this reputation, but here it seems to be true indeed, and not just a reputation. And finally, we made also a lot of works to identify the cluster of income. I showed you later a figure with the various sources of incomes, and we took as reference, the best is 3 pillars. It's the top in Switzerland. If you have the 3 pillars, normally life is wonderful, everything must be okay, and so on. Indeed, you are 10 times less at risk if you have the 3 pillars. To some extent, it's a tautological result. It's completely, that time it works. You have the various sources of incomes. I try to go fast because, in fact, at some moment we decided, what can we do with the threshold of poverty? They are below, they are poor, they are above, they are not poor. In fact, a fair proportion is just above. Only 20% of the people with a low education have good incomes. The other ones are poor or just above the poverty threshold. And so we look at also at this cluster of income, and especially the first one, people who receive social welfare. If they receive social welfare, it's because they have incomes below the poverty threshold. But sometimes, thanks to the social welfare, they are just above. You see the relation. And it's quite important because I told you that poverty decreased from almost 50 to 21%. But in fact, if at the individual level you cumulate the people who are below the poverty threshold and people who receive social welfare and are not under the poverty threshold thanks to that, you have 1 about 3 elderly, 33%. Poverty is much more present in Switzerland than what we believe, than what the political world think, and so on and so on. And here, again, what we see is the importance of education. You are 2 times more at risk to receive social welfare if you receive at a low education. You are less at risk if you receive at a high education. You are less at risk if you are home owner. We are not very surprised. You are more at risk if you are oldest old. Just perfectly normal, perfectly expected from the preceding results and so on. Then you have a strange group of people. They have just the first pillar and some savings. They have no second pillar. And a lot of them are home owners. That's why the professional trajectories are not working. In Switzerland, until the age of 62, you can take all your second pillar, but only for one reason, to buy a real estate, to become home owner. And so those people are theoretically poor. They live below the poverty threshold if you look at the incomes, but they own their house. By the way, the price of the real estate are so... By the way, if they have a good real estate, if you look at their wealth and not at their income, they could seem very rich, because it's extremely expensive to become a homeowner in Switzerland. Normally, you go to the bank and it's an agreement for 90 years. I refuse to do that. Leaving debt to my children is really too much. But so several people stayed out from the system, and it was a debate in Switzerland 2 years ago, a very young debate, but do we have to pay social welfare to homeowners? It's their fault. It's the individual responsibility in the societies of individuals and so on. And by the way, it's a debate. I have no simple answer. Okay. I forget to tell you that, but I want to do it because it's important. In 1979, 66% of the old people in Switzerland had only the low educational degree. 66%. I mean, the young majority. They remain 18% now. From a young majority, they became a minority. We could think that this minority accumulated more disadvantaged. It's not true from an economic point of view. In 1979, low education predicted from 1 to 4 the probability of being poor in old age. And in 2011, the same. So the link, as far as economic vulnerability is concerned, remained extremely stable. So it means that class still counts. It's the title of a book of a neo-Marxist, Linolen Wright. My old professor in Liège, Etienne Hélin, that David knew, was used to tell that he was a right bourgeois, but that he believed in classes, in social classes. So you do not need to be leftist to believe in social class. It's really your early life condition, your initial social status that created your educational level that provoke old age poverty. Moreover, it's the origin of the difference between men and women, and it's, I mean, I didn't insist, but we worked a lot on the trajectories, and in fact, no, everything was education. Then we had an unexpected result, but I will go fast. People, their job implied physical strain, and in fact, they are less poor in old age. But quite probably it's because they are selected, they are still alive. And second, they work in the industry sector, where the second pillar was established far before 1985. So it's probably this reason that it is behind. What is really important is the disappearance of widows over poverty. In 1979 and in 1994, the widows were clearly more at risk of poverty compared to the widowed, to the married woman, and so on and so on. And it disappeared in 2011, and it shows that sometimes political intervention can really work. In 1997, they changed the rules of AVS so that the widow could inherit from the pillar of her late husband. And we did not really know what could have been the effect, but the effect has been the disappearance of widows over poverty. So, and it's important because this year they wanted to change the system and to make some economies to decrease the cost. They wanted to cut this measure. So we came with the data, and it was part of a huge debate. So some people are hating us, but that's not a big problem. Okay, I move. So if we try to match empirical results with the theory, we have been very surprised, but it was at the end not so much a surprise. The main point is that the people who received decades before their retirement a low education, they were not able, they were not equipped to take advantages of the 30 glorious and of the periods of economic growth that continued in Switzerland. They stayed low skilled workers. We look at, because we have in data the first and last SES. And in fact, only 30% of the people who started as low skilled became just skilled, just a rank above, but not more. And the other ones stayed at the same level. So it's really this point, unable to take advantages of opportunities. When the Swiss society became wealthy, became rich, they stayed below. I haven't the time, but in fact, it was a relative surprise for us because we expected a very different possibility. We expected something probabilistic, not deterministic, following Ulrich Beck, no social determinism. You can fall down, stay down. You can fall down, go up, and so on and so on. But in fact, no, forget that. Forget. The people with a low education who are 4 times more at risk than the people with high education, in fact, they didn't experiment across their life course an accumulation of disadvantages. First, because they were low, and they could not fall below into misery, into the streets, into dying from hunger, because of the welfare state. It makes a huge difference. And in fact, it was not a process of cumulative disadvantage, but a process of status maintenance, but at a low level. And that's quite new from a theoretical point of view. Then we remain with a lot of fascinating questions. One of those questions is about, it's in red, the 20% of people with a low education who are wealthy in their old age, the outliers, the strange people, those who arrived to do that, the curve above. Who did that? I mean, only 1 about 5. And we want to look especially at this group. And finally, there is this difference between the people who are living below the poverty threshold and people who are receiving welfare benefits. And this difference, among others, is gender. But that time, at the advantage of women. More women with poor incomes are receiving welfare benefits, welfare help, than men. And it's a new issue. It's what is named non-take-up phenomena. No, but I'm a man. I worked all my life. I want to preserve my pride. I will not ask welfare help. But it could also be that, as Lipsky called them, the street-level bureaucrats, the social assistants in the social institution and so on, an old woman, she deserves help. An old man, less spontaneously. But they are pure speculation. Anyway, it will be extremely interesting to look at non-take.